Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please let us know about our audio levels. We probably experienced the most technical difficulties we've ever experienced so far doing this show. So bear with us. And in fact, I think Georgie's screen is actually malfunctioning right now. So you just have to bear with us because honestly, we tried really hard to figure all this stuff out, but we couldn't. So I think Skype is altering Georgie's window based on his bandwidth. And so we'll just have to figure that out for another show. But Georgie, how are you, sir? Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for, having the patience of dealing with my shitty Skype.
It's definitely not you. It's me being a noob to OBS and all these things. Also, like I shouldn't accidentally mute myself this time. So that was a huge problem last episode. I have remapped the mute button away from my mouse. And so that should be a lot better. So thank you guys. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping stuff. Let me change the window here. Consider subscribing if you're new. We do live streams every other week on Fridays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All super chats are going to be donated to Mr. Raymond Peat, PhD, and we'll read them towards the end of the show. Usually this is the part where I say if somebody's annoying you in the chat, you can block them. But I've heard of channels getting shut down for really bizarre things said in the chat. So please control yourself if you're in the chat. And if there are any death threats and things, I've instructed the moderator, Steph, and also me, I'll be looking at it, and we're just going to ban you. No death threats or no psycho talk in the chat because I don't want my channel to be shut down. And yeah, so please bear with us. And then we're changing the show format a little bit. We talked last time, and I think both of us came to the conclusion that the nonstop barrage of patron questions in the middle of the show was kind of, I think it was making me kind of dumb towards the center of the show. I was kind of tuning out, and I don't think it was the most fun thing for you is answering 40 questions, I don't want to speak for you though. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I agree. After 20, it starts getting, even if they're all different, I think people tune out. It's just the attention span of most people is probably around 40 minutes. That's what psychology shows. So if we can keep it around 30 minutes, it's probably ideal.
Yeah. So I think we I think Georgie and I are bond under the idea that we want to keep the show as fun as possible and make it along the lines of our own interests, and I think that's what's going to make the best show, and so it doesn't mean we'll never answer a Patreon question or anything, but I think we'll just be open to retooling the show. And towards the end of this, we'll try maybe like a call-in segment, but it's in alpha stage right now, so I don't know really how that is going to go. But we're just going to go through the articles, kind of talk about them, and then if you have a burning question that you need answered, please use the super chat feature, and that would be the most appropriate way, I think, of getting your question answered. And also, just because I have it all open, this is the Peat email exchange. I talk about it probably every time we do one of these, but this has so much information in it, and I really encourage anybody that thinks they have a lot of questions to scroll through it, because I think it's just like one of the best resources on the internet, and so I mean, I go through it and I feel like I know a lot of what Ray is going to say, and I'll learn a lot of different things. And then Georgie has a Twitter now, so go follow Georgie on Twitter. It's twitter.com/hateit. And my Instagram, obviously, I tried to set it up as like kind of a resource thing. You can follow me on Instagram. And then Georgie and I have like a backlog of older episodes of generative energy podcast episodes. And so if you had an hour or two to kill, that might be worth going into. Georgie, anything to add to that list of things?
Well, we also have a giveaway. I guess
I was going to get to it.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
Okay. So I have actually already randomly done the winners. So we do a giveaway every week, and Georgie is so gracious to provide 4 idlabsdc.com supplements. So thank you so much, Georgie. It's amazing. I sincerely appreciate it. And so the winners this week were Sydney Maxi Taxi. Thank you, Carol Ellerston. Thank you, Hilgen DG14, and Vladimir Irfan. So you guys need to email me, danny@dannyroddy.com, and then I will pass emails back and forth with Georgie, and we'll get you whatever. So what supplements were you offering?
Well, since you started with the Tocovit, I think people like that. And I would also add like a bottle of Oxidal, Energy, and Astroban. Those happen to be the most popular ones that people buy, so I thought, maybe that's what people would like.
Sweet. And again, thank you so much, Georgie. That is it's so gracious of you. Okay, so anything else? Thank you, Steph, best moderator on the planet, sincerely appreciate it. She's always here moderating. And is there anything, I feel like there's something I'm forgetting, but anything else, Georgie, before we get on to the news?
Not that maybe I'm blanking out too, but I think we covered it all. People will remind us if we forget something.
Okay. Sweet. Okay, so our first. We didn't really go through this. Was there an article you wanted to start with?
It's up to you. I mean, I posted. I think you already listed some of them in your announcement. Let's see. Actually, I like all of them, but let's start with the one about the psychiatric diagnoses are worthless. Most mental conditions stem from stress. I don't think we covered this one on the last podcast, but basically, the article goes into details about how a couple of things. First of all, I posted another article for the previous show which showed that 90% of all depression cases are due to a traumatic event, right?
Yeah.
And then, the WebMD article is really diabolically worded by saying only 10% of people experience depression, not due to stress conditions. Well, that's another way of saying that 90% are due, right? And now this article, without quoting WebMD or even referencing it to in any way, kind of corroborates this and says, well, psychiatry as it is right now is a very disingenuous profession. It bases all of the diagnosis on something called the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Psychiatric Diseases, and it's all based on your discussion with the psychiatrist. There's some observation as well, but bottom line, there is no objective biomarker similar to the way there are for, let's say, heart disease or inflammation or hypothyroidism. And I'm not saying these are the gold standard, right? You can have something like the TSH test can be very misleading. You have like a normal TSH, but you're still hypothyroid, etc., etc. Still, it helps to have something corroborating your observations as a physician. Psychiatry doesn't have that. Like if you talk to a psychiatrist about, let's say you get diagnosed with depression and say, okay, so what made you think that I have depression? Then the psychiatrist will say, well, you meet we'll go through the checklist. I think there's like something called the Hamilton scale of depression, and you basically meet a certain number of criteria, and then boom, you're diagnosed with depression. But what this article says is, but hold on a second. If you go through all of these psychiatric conditions, they overlap to such a dramatic degree that there is no single diagnosis that will actually cover your specific symptoms. For example, if you have schizophrenia, chances are very high you will also have anxiety, you'll also have depression, you probably also have obsessive compulsive disorder, you'll probably have oppositional defiance disorder. In other words, when cops try to arrest you, you'll try to fight them off, right? So all of these things are separate disorders, and you meet the criteria for them as well. And you can actually get diagnosed with all of them separately, and it becomes this hodgepodge of diagnosis, but it doesn't lead to the underlying cause. And what the study says is it ultimately most of these mental health conditions stem from some kind of either acute traumatic experience or chronic stress. And so basically this article says the attack on psychiatry is two-pronged. One, there is no objective definition that really gives you a reliable diagnosis. And two, psychiatry consistently ignores the causes. The stress is involved because, as we've discussed in previous podcasts, cortisol is known biomarker of depression in every animal model studied so far. Serotonin is actually a known biomarker of depression in most of the animal models studied. Glutamate is a known biomarker of depression in most of the animal models studied. However, these things are not being discussed by psychiatry. The excuse always is, just because it happens in animals doesn't mean it happens in humans. But this is a very perverse way of looking at things. Why don't we take it the other way around? Unless psychiatry presents evidence that this doesn't apply to humans, I would take that it does because it applies to so many different animal models, right? So the totality of evidence is on the side of this does apply to humans, because so far no evidence has been presented by psychiatrists saying that it doesn't. It's just a claim. They say we don't want this, we don't accept it because it hasn't been replicated in humans. And guess what? Nobody wants to replicate it in humans. It's not considered a desirable avenue for a doctor because there is no interest in these biomarkers. There just isn't. Probably one of the reasons is that for many of these, let's say if it turns out that cortisol is a direct cause of depression in humans, we know it is, but let's say it's proven officially, psychiatry can't really make money off of this because there are already drugs approved for lowering excess cortisol, such as the drug RU486. Most anti-serotonin drugs also lower cortisol. So there isn't much money to be made. And this is true for most of the objectively known biomarkers of depression. Drugs are already on the market to modulate these biomarkers in a way that treats depression, possibly even cures it for good. And psychiatry doesn't seem to be interested in that. It just wants to continuously expand the DSM to be an even bigger and bigger and bigger Bible of these bizarre conditions, when in reality it's probably only one: chronic stress or acute stress.
Weren't you talking, was that after a show one time that we were talking about you knew a psychiatrist and they had like a very specific approach of saying that a person would need to admit that they had, it's like a 12-step kind of program, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, the first thing is, so it's almost like when you go to your psychiatrist, the presumption already is you have a problem.
Yeah.
So it's just it's very rare you go to a psychiatrist and they'll send you away by saying, oh, nothing's wrong with you, right? Everything's good, go home. Your primary care practitioner may, but they base their results on examination, and they base the diagnosis based on examination and also the blood tests. Well, first of all, the examinations that the primary care practitioner performs are usually much more objective. They will look at your skin, they will look at your eyes, they measure blood pressure, right, heart rate. They'll do an EKG, maybe even EEG. All of these are like dramatic, like light years more objective than what the psychiatrist will do. And what the psychiatrist will do will put you in the chair and basically at some point will somehow convince you that your relationship with your mother was messed up. And, and then probably, and most people, if they're told this, they will probably in the back of their mind say, yeah, can't deny it. We do have a complicated relationship. And that's it. That's all it's needed. Once you're into the system, there's really no getting out. You get diagnosed, and from that point on, it's a condition that needs to be managed for life. It's great for psychiatry, but really bad for us.
So what you're saying, Tom Cruise was right all this time?
Yeah, but for the wrong reasons.
Okay. Any more on this one, or do you want to go to another one?
I think that pretty much covers it. Let's see. The aspirin now proposes treatment for brain cancer. That's not really news. Apparently, there's a company out there that's been, and I checked on them. They've been in the news multiple times. So they're saying, okay, aspirin seems to work for brain cancer. Oh, wow. Well, how come this isn't front page news? I don't know. But what they're saying now is, well, aspirin has these terrible side effects, GI bleeding, it irritates the gut, etc., etc. And also, it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very well. None of these things are true. Remember the studies that I posted? Despite the fact that aspirin is expected to increase bleeding, it actually decreased dramatically the death from bleeding in both the GI tract and the brain. Mm-hmm. So it's actually protective against the lethal kind of bleeding. And then on top of that, basically aspirin metabolizes in the body into salicylic acid, which very readily crosses the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't need any enhancement. But what these guys are doing is developing a patentable version of aspirin, which has triacetin, and I forget another compound that will basically make it less irritating to the GI tract and safer. Mm-hmm. All this does is it's considered a novel drug, so it can be patented, and as such you can submit an application to the FDA and say, look, this is our drug, approve it. And if the FDA approves it, good news is we will know that FDA says aspirin can treat brain cancer. Bad news is this company may actually have some enforcement power and approach the FDA and say, I want you to start controlling the sales of aspirin because they're undercutting my profit. And to the people that say this is a conspiracy theory, I'll remind them that what happened to the vitamin B6 isomer known as pyridoxamine. A company actually did a clinical trial with one of the naturally occurring isomers of vitamin B6 and got it approved for treating chronic kidney disease. Went up to the FDA and said, this is a drug now, you need to stop its sales because it's undercutting our profit. FDA said, yes, sir. And now pyridoxamine is illegal to buy in the United States without a prescription. You can buy it from Canada or Mexico, not in the United States.
I forgot what I was reading, but it was like the history of Celebrex. And they were saying, I'm pretty sure it was Celebrex, but they were saying the whole point of that drug was to like make a COX inhibitor like aspirin, but to be able to patent something to sell. And I think, I don't recall the exact price of it, but it's like way more money with way more risks than aspirin. Yeah.
And you remember the Vioxx drug, right? It killed quite a few people.
Yeah.
And all of these Celebrex and Vioxx, etc., they're all part of the family of the so-called coxib drugs. And some of them are actually stilbenoid drugs. And the most famous natural stilbenoid is resveratrol. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the side effects of Vioxx, which got withdrawn, are very reminiscent to the side effects of resveratrol, which is cardiovascular events, blood clots, what else? Infertility, and various cancers associated with the female reproductive tract, breast cancer as well. So it's not a coincidence. These are heavily estrogenic drugs. The stilbenoid molecule is very estrogenic. Resveratrol being a very potent natural phytoestrogen, and so are most of the coxib drugs. I'm surprised that Celebrex is not withdrawn as well. I guess it hasn't killed enough people yet.
My mom keeps calling me on Skype. Jesus Christ. Mom, chill out. That is nuts. And this isn't necessarily brain cancer, but I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but there was a paper about hair loss being related to white matter hyperintensities or white matter lesions. And so, of course, I went into Google Scholar and was typing in like caffeine, white matter lesions, aspirin, white matter lesions. And there was a paper from 2014 saying that aspirin helped remyelinate the, how do you say it, oligodendrocytes?
Yeah. Oligodendrocytes, yes.
Oligodendrocytes. And I think it was an animal model, but the people were pretty favorable towards aspirin doing that kind of thing. And so, just being beneficial for the brain, basically.
So, I mean, it's a very basic effect. Aspirin, I think Pete mentioned a few times, there's a quote somewhere on the online that basically says that although the aspirin chemical structure is much simpler than progesterone, their effects largely overlap. Both oppose estrogen, both of them are thermogenic, both of them, accelerate metabolism. Both of them oppose nitric oxide. Both of them oppose serotonin, etc., etc. If you look at the various effects systemically, aspirin and progesterone are largely overlapping. So, considering the fact that progesterone and most of the other neurosteroids are heavily promyelin, it's not surprising that aspirin has the same effect. And most of that effect probably stems from two main mechanisms of action: opposing estrogen and nitric oxide. Both of these are heavily involved in the myelination of the nerves.
I'm sorry, I was doing something while you were talking, but you said progesterone. That Katie points out progesterone remyelinates, and that was something else that I had read about. Yeah. Sorry, I was changing my status in Skype so my mom couldn't call me anymore.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so next article.
A call for medical nihilism. To do nothing is also a good medicine. I think that's a great article. It's a great article. It's about a book. But as soon as I saw that article, I thought, man, Ivan Illich must be clapping in his grave and doing backflips from happiness. Because this is something he worked for his entire life, and nobody took him seriously. Everybody thought at the time even his supporters, sadly enough, they thought like, what's this guy talking about? Look at medicine. We're making so much progress. We look at genetics. It's like it's probably going to be the future of the human race. We're going to be able to re-engineer ourselves. We're going to cure every disease. We're going to turn ourselves into superhumans. And he just kept saying, nah, that's not true. I don't see it going that way, especially not when it's run by this corrupt, cabal and these massive government agencies, massive institutions that, aside from generating bureaucracy and killing people, they don't really do much else. And they do it very expensively too.
Can I just read you a quote, one of my favorite quotes by Ivan Illich? He says, "Preservation of the sick life of medically dependent people in an unhealthy environment is the principal business of the medical profession." I thought he nailed it.
Yeah. Spot on. And the reason I like this article is that apparently, if you look throughout the history of medicine, all the way up until the mid 20th century, which is when, coincidentally or not, Ray said this is when the culture in the United States, really in the Western world in general, really turned towards authoritarianism. Basically, it became just a semi-fascist environment with these silly decorations to convince people that they really have freedom, but in reality they didn't. Anyways, well, all the way up until the 1950s, apparently even very famous physicians such as the dean of Harvard Medical School thought that officially practiced medicine is largely worthless. Mm-hmm. He even has a quote in that post where the dean of Harvard Medical School said, if somebody were to collect all the discoveries of modern medicine and put them in a book and throw them at the bottom of the sea, it will be a very good day for humanity and a very poor day for fish. So and this continued apparently. I mean, the doctors were so humble, and this culture completely disappeared somewhere around the end of the Second World War. But this book, A Call for Medical Nihilism, essentially says that every single treatment aside from antibiotics, insulin, and aspirin has been utter and complete failure. The only thing that we have achieved the only thing medicine has achieved as science is basically conquer infectious disease, conquer diabetes, right, through insulin, and then basically discover aspirin. But it's really, aspirin is not medical discovery. The Egyptians knew about it 4,000 years ago. So, but it's modern medicine that kind of put it into more widespread use. And this article says, look, pick any discipline, any medical specialty, and basically pick any blockbuster drug. There's studies out there, they're pretty conclusive, that say that this drug is at best a waste of money. At worst, it's contributing to the rate of iatrogenic deaths, which right now are the #3 killer in the United States. Cancer is #1 now. It surpassed cardiovascular disease. So CVD is second, and now we have iatrogenic deaths. 400,000 deaths every year due to medical procedures. And by the way, this rate doesn't include the medical procedures that actually went well. I think it only counts the medical procedures that are considered that went south, and basically the person died as a result of a medical mistake. I think this number greatly underestimates the real number, which is somebody with cancer who died from heart failure because the chemotherapy drug was cardiotoxic. That person's death will not be counted as iatrogenic. They'll simply be counted as dying as a side effect of the cancer. Actually, you won't even be counted as a cancer death. And you won't even be counted as a cardiovascular death. You'll be counted as something else, like heart failure, which is, it's further down the road.
Well, if I remember correctly, one of the things he said in his medical nemesis book was that I have it kind of right here, but like the doctor's effectiveness is always an illusion. Like the release of vaccines, the increase in health always coincides with a better environment. But I guess because of how history is remembered or who it's written by, these like pandemics of problems are said to be have been resolved by X, Y, and Z medical intervention. And his point was like, that's never the case. It's like better sanitary conditions or better nutrition.
Right.
And
less war, right? Less stress on people, things like that.
Yeah. So I could read this, but the combined death rate from scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, and measles among children up to 15 shows that 90% of the total decline in mortality between 1860 and 1865 had occurred before the introduction of antibiotics and widespread immunization. In part, this recession may be attributed to improved housing and to a decrease in virulence of microorganisms, but by far the most important factor was a higher host resistance due to better nutrition. In poor countries today, diarrhea and upper respiratory tract infections occur more frequently, last longer, and lead to higher mortality where nutrition is poor, no matter how much or how little medical care is available. Did you ever find that paper Ray talked about where it was like an isolated tribe and they gave 1/3 of the people doctors, 1/3 of the people vaccines, another group got, I'm butchering this, but it's like one group got vaccines and doctors, and then a fourth group
got nothing.
Yeah, got nothing. Or like a nutritious porridge or something, and they did the best, I guess, out of all the groups.
I got it. I think it was like 3 years ago. I remember reading, and basically the last group got better food and clean water because they were actually like in nature they were drinking water that was found to be like laden with parasites. So they actually they sterilized the water. And they gave him decent water and decent food. There wasn't really anything highly nutritious. It was just dramatically better than what they used to have. And these people did the best.
Yeah. Not to beat a dead horse, but he also talks about like when somebody's sick in medical nemesis, it was like a cultural event, and how bizarre it is that when you're sick now, you go to a hospital where all the other sick people are, and how that's like never been done before in history, and how odd that is. And so, and when you were sick, you were surrounded by your family at home, and you're not like in the hospital with like a sterile environment. And the only reason the hospitals existed was like the new machines like x-rays and surgeries and things. In that book, Rockefeller Medicine Men, they describe the whole process of the change of naturopathic medicine to allopathic medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to money. Basically, this kind of medicine is monetizable. The kind of medicine where you stay at home and you get better because your life is better amongst your family. That's not something that's easily controllable by a system that wants to extract money. What are you going to do? Charge your relatives? They're going to charge their relatives for just being present there and providing indirect medical care. It doesn't work like that. Actually, it undermines the efforts of the doctors, who are probably going to see, a decrease in employment opportunities, because if the vast majority of conditions are improvable at home or even treatable at home, then nobody's going to go to the hospital. Nobody's going to call a doctor. And then you're going to have a very serious problem. I mean, these people have, most new doctors come out with a student debt, with student loans north of $250,000. So imagine these people are struggling even right now to pay off their debts. And, the banks who finance their education are very intimately involved in this whole process. And they want these doctors to stay employed, not because they care about their future or, people getting better because they're getting medical care, simply because they want this money repaid. And this money will not be repaid if the system generates less employment, or at least less profitable employment.
I know we characterize doctors, or I characterize doctors in a certain way, but did you ever see that? Maybe it was a TED talk of like the crisis of suicides with like new doctors. That's kind of, I mean, it shows how difficult, I guess,
It's not just new doctors. It's the highest suicide rate of any profession. And they actually, I saw a study, I may have sent it to you 2 years ago, that looked at what happens to the new doctors. Mm-hmm. And they said that they're kind of like three groups, more or less of equal size. One group gets really depressed really quickly. They basically realize what this whole game is all about. Life will be miserable. They will not make money, and they will not help people. Mm-hmm. And which is kind of like the worst combination. Like all of your efforts were in vain, and you're making people worse. So basically, some of these people, get really depressed. Others get really hardened. Mm-hmm. And then it's like basically these hardened people. So the people who get depressed, they either commit suicide or they have a much higher rate of cardiovascular disease, which it's a very tight correlation between depressive disorders, mental health disorders, and heart disease in general, right? And then the people who got hardened, they didn't get heart disease, but they had dramatically higher rates of cancer. Mm-hmm. In fact, every doctor who survived, I think they call it the first year, the depressing year of medical residency, every doctor who went through that without getting some kind of a mental health disorder, in other words, they were basically psychopaths. I think most of these doctors ended up dying from cancer later on, regardless of what practice, whether they went to private practice or kept working in the hospital. But basically, the lack of empathy was essentially a surrogate, a very early biomarker of cancer, not just cancer, but dying from cancer in general.
It sounds like my attitude while working at the Apple Genius Bar. The lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy, yes. That's the name of the game right now.
Okay, so anything else on that one, or next story?
I think that's pretty much covers it. I guess it's some. I forgot to say this: to do nothing is also a good medicine, which is part of the title. That's actually Hippocratic said that. So this was his thing. He said that the first thing a doctor should consider, and this is where the statement "first do no harm" comes from. He was very well aware that humans, given their limited knowledge and the always changing, the unique context of every patient, the constantly changing circumstances and contexts, this makes the profession of the doctor very difficult. And many times, it's a patient would get better if, just like you said, if you provide supportive therapy. But that was considered doing nothing, right? So he was very well aware, and he said that to do nothing is also good medicine. I added myself sometimes, but that's mostly for legal reasons. I don't want to get accused of essentially telling people not to go and see their doctor. There have been several cases already of people successfully getting prosecuted on the state level for essentially discouraging people from seeing their doctor. It's considered like an unlicensed medical advice. Even though it's not a medical advice, telling people not to see their doctor is apparently dangerous. So we need to be careful.
Well, here is Ivan Illich quoting Hippocrates. So he says, those who are treated the least probably make the best progress. And he says, for the sick, Hippocrates said, the least is best. And then I have another quote. I forget. It's like by a doctor, but it's like, do as much as possible for the patient and as little and something about, I'm totally forgetting what it was, but doing a lot for the patient and as little as possible to the patient. I think it was something around that lines.
Exactly.
And and again, like I'm not in my own profession or whatever of talking to people on Skype. I have a theory that it's more just the conversation that is the if there is any benefit in talking to me, it would be the human conversation. And I really don't think it's me like imposing my technical information like on the person. I think that's probably usually barely ever helpful, you know, but that over a long period of time of doing those types of things, it does seem that just having a good conversation is the biggest part of the therapy, if there is any at all.
You want to hear an interesting story? Aristotle had a theory on that, how this works. So remember the quote that if the observer and the observed form a functional system, they're essentially the same. So what happens is that if you have a good rapport with somebody and they're sick and you're healthy, you transfer some of that health to them. So it's kind of like you're helping them break out of their own helplessness, which is at the base of most chronic conditions. It's like when your condition is chronic and it's really not improving, it's usually because deep down you have given up hope. And Aristotle thought that in many problems, not just health, that's the help of the interaction. It's seeing somebody, just like that rat that sees at least one other rat escape, and then they keep fighting. It's the same way. But the key thing is you have to form a functional system, because otherwise, you know, if a person is sick and then goes to a healthy doctor, in theory, they should also be getting better. But if the doctor doesn't care and treats them mechanically, just like another specimen, then this functional system doesn't occur. So there's no transfer of health.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's one thing, because I've heard Ray say similar things. It's one thing to hear Ray say it or whatever, but it's another thing to really, I feel like I came to that conclusion almost on my own, and then I had remembered what Ray said, and I was like, oh man, he's totally right. It's definitely not about like technical relaying of information or whatever. So I thought that was really funny. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that, Georgi. What? Anything else on this one?
I think that's pretty much it. Next one is pretty cool. That imagination is crucial for altruism. So they basically, they found out that in order for people to help out, first of all, people are helpful by default. What the study does is also it dispels the myth that people are really out there for themselves, right? But what it does find is that in order for a person to be helpful, they have to be their imagination has to be well functioning. And we already know that imagination depends on metabolism and good energy, right? If you don't have that, if you're driven by serotonin, the imagination is the first thing to go. You become very rigid, very routine oriented. There's no imagination whatsoever. So in order for you to be altruistic, in order for you to feel the desire to help, your imagination has to be functioning, and you have to be able to imagine yourself in the position of the person who needs help. Now here's the key part. Not sure how many doctors you know, but they undergo a very rigorous training to not ever imagine themselves in the position of their patient. It's considered detrimental to both providing a quality of care and also for their mental health. It's basically stated that if you do that, you're going to suffer a burnout, and then you're not going to be able to help your patient because you will not provide, you'll be too emotional, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to somehow absolve the emotion. But they undergo very specific training, and I know the keyword is imagination. They say you should never imagine yourself in your patient's shoes. But I've talked to doctors and I say, well, this sounds like you can be empathetic, right? How can you empathize with your patient if you cannot put yourself in their shoes? Well, there are different levels of empathy is usually the answer. It's like you can feel bad for the patient without visualizing what they're going through. And to me, that's completely, it's bonkers. You know how this just can't be. If this whole functional system depends on the person on the other side seeing that you care about their condition, that you care about their problems, and you're accepting of whatever problem they're wanting to share with you. You don't judge, right? You're not immediately jumping into giving advice, unsolicited or solicited, doesn't matter. It's a matter of total unconditional acceptance, which is another, I think, thing that Ray talked about and Ivan Illich also discussed. Yet this is exactly what doctors are trained not to do.
Or Carl Rogers, right? Unconditional positive regard. Is that someone?
Right, right, exactly. Unconditional positive regard. And this study found that actually, so in order for you to experience that, you have to not only your imagination has to be functional, but you have to put yourself in the person's shoes, the person who has problems. And they also found that the more vivid the imagination, the more, in other words, which to me is a surrogate for health, the more vivid the imagination, the more willing the person was to help the person in trouble. Which, once again, not surprising because, as we know, altruism depends on you being in good health, right? Having an excess of energy that you want to share with the world. Doesn't always go that way. Some sick people are also very helpful, but usually a person who is under the influence of serotonin, they will not be healthy. Imagination will not be there, and they will just get a very routine. If you get help at all, you'll be simply, they call 911 and they walk away. Leave that.
Well, did you ever see that article, Medicine, Science, or Art by Panda, 2006? But he says, for successful practice, a doctor has to be the artist armed with basic scientific knowledge in medicine. And then similarly, I think this, I don't know if this is the same. The same paper. And he also says, the worst man of science is he who is never an artist. In early times, medicine was an art, which took its place at the side of poetry and painting. Today, they try to make science of it, placing it beside mathematics, astronomy, and physics. And so, yeah, just that, I was talking to somebody about their oyster consumption, and zinc being this important mineral, that's lost in a lot of degenerative diseases. And they were, and I understand why they were asking the questions that they were asking, but it's like they were saying, well, I put my oyster consumption into Chronometer and it looks like I'm good on that. And it's like, you never want to think like, oh, I'm just good, what if you need more zinc than what, just a weekly oyster consumption? I don't know. I have no idea, for somebody not under extreme stress, a can of oysters a week would be fine. But I don't know the limits to that. Maybe Ray has some very specific point of view, but I talk about imagination, being creative on thinking about yourself and your problems. I think is really useful to not just thinking, oh, I'm taking care of all my bases and I'm still sick. I feel like that almost means you're not taking care of everything. There's something off, but it can take a kind of a creative imagination to figure out what that is.
Well, in many of the RDAs, I think they were based off of prisoners dying from starvation, right? So just because Chronometer says you're fine, it means you're barely surviving in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean this is the optimal intake. I think there's also it's a very, very pernicious effect of our culture that we have right now is making people distrust their cravings, right? So if you're craving oysters or you're craving seafood in general, and let's say you've already had one serving per week, many people will say, no, my doctor said mercury is such a huge risk. I can't have more than one servings of seafood a week, and I'm going to ignore my cravings. And this creates this vicious cycle of trying to go by the numbers, when in reality, the numbers really need to be, they need to be taken through the prism of your own unique requirements. And you don't know what your requirements are. They actually change all the time. All you have is a guideline. You may use Chronometer just as a general guideline that you are not eating too little, but that doesn't mean it's sufficient, right? In terms of sufficiency, probably just keep eating oysters until you find out what is your sickness point. Well, if you can eat oysters every day and not get sick of them, you're probably very deficient in zinc.
What's the William Blake quote is, you never know it's enough till you know it's too much.
That's right.
Okay, yeah, I love this article. What, any more on this or next one?
No, I think that covers it. Niacinamide improves symptoms of ALS. That'll be pretty quick. There was actually, the article looked at the microbiome of people with ALS and people without it, and found out that both mice and humans, with ALS, they have like a very unique composition of the microbiome, and both species were low in a bacteria that produces niacinamide. Now, niacinamide is not only synthesized in the gut; it's synthesized by cells from the amino acid tryptophan. But they checked both mice and people with ALS, and they found deficiency of niacinamide in both species. So they gave the mice niacinamide, and I couldn't get the full article because it's brand new. Psychiatric refused to give me the full study, but basically, apparently, niacinamide improved the symptoms but didn't cure it. So they're saying there's something else involved. It's not just the deficiency of niacinamide, but I think it still corroborates the idea that ALS is a energetic / mitochondrial disorder. And if you remember the article from the last podcast, that ALS is basically a condition linked to excessive fatty acid oxidation and insufficient glucose, that the two together, corroborate each other very well, because niacinamide inhibits the oxidation of fat and promotes the oxidation of glucose.
Well, and what was the benefit? The benefit of niacinamide is contributing to that redox balance of the more oxidized.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, two things. First of all, it improves the redox balance, shifts it towards oxidation, but also it inhibits the excessive lipolysis. So it's going to shift the metabolism towards glucose and less and away from fat. And that's what the first study found, is that in ALS you do have an excess of fat acid oxidation. And then the way they treated it, they simply provided extra dietary glucose, which I don't see why not combine both. Give the extra glucose and give the niacinamide for an extra effect.
And semi off topic, but that tryptophan conversion to niacinamide, Ray said calcium was important, but I do have a paper that says B6 is important. Was there anything else that is important for that?
Let's see. So I think basically, so without calcium, you synthesize mostly serotonin from tryptophan. There are two pathways where tryptophan can go, and I think calcium inhibits the pathway that goes towards serotonin. So there's only one remaining, and that's niacinamide. Anything else? I think also inflammation is important. Whenever you have inflammation, basically you will tend to move tryptophan towards the pathway for serotonin as well. Anything else? Nitric oxide is also important. Nitric oxide promotes the synthesis of serotonin, inhibits the synthesis of niacinamide, and all of these are they're individual studies. If you go and look, and if you look for ALS serotonin or ALS nitric oxide or ALS adrenal hyperactivity, ALS like gonadal hypoactivity, thyroid, etc., everything corroborates the idea that ALS is simply basically the peripheral nervous system manifestation of chronic stress, chronic inflammation, chronic endotoxin overload, all of the portions of the sickness field that we've discussed before. It just happens that in some people, I guess the nervous system is the weakest link, and that's what breaks. But in reality, it's only one cause and only one disease, really. Ray likes to call it hypothyroidism. I don't, because it focuses on the thyroid. When in reality, thyroid could be fine, but there could be things blocking thyroid from functioning, and that's the endotoxin, the nitric oxide, the excess PUFA, the excess serotonin, excess fatty acid oxidation, etc. So, yeah.
Sweet. The next one was gorillas have developed human-like societies that are not based on kin.
Yeah, that's probably making Richard Dawkins, he's not dead yet, but he's probably rolling in his bed and having nightmares. Because, if you ask him, he'll tell you that any large group of animals in the wild are probably heavily genetically related. He just can't have any other explanation of why a group of animals would basically work. Because whenever you have a group of animals, you always have a little bit of a conflict between the benefit of the individual versus the benefit of the group. And in his opinion, the only way of an individual will voluntarily relinquish, basically will work against its own, maximizing its own benefit, is if they're related to the rest of the members. So these members combined are essentially worth more than this individual. Yet, basically, so in Dawkins' opinion, this is his explanation of why no other species has formed societies at the scale that humans have. However, apparently that's not true. Gorillas, and this was a recent discovery. This study is very controversial. It got attacked from multiple people. Of course, all of them coming from the genetic field. And basically, the study found that gorillas develop large-scale society in the thousands, and most of these gorillas that are there that meet on a daily basis, it's almost like they go out to have a drink, but in their case, like they eat leaves or they go drink water. The vast majority of these gorillas are not related, and many of them are males. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they have an interest into each other, in each other. They're just there to hang out, for lack of a better expression. Mm-hmm. And even the scientists who were studying them were very surprised. They thought that it felt like just a bunch of friends, having a good time. There was no better explanation in their mind. So we'll see what happens. I mean, basically, this is a very new paper, only one of them, and most of the critique says, well, this needs to be replicated, at least one more time before we even take it seriously. Right now, they're considering like a publicity stunt. Until it's replicated, it's so controversial that we refuse to believe it. So let's see what happens.
How did it oppose Dawkins's version of things? Like he thinks it's just related
Dawkins basically says that these groups of gorillas have no business hanging out with each other because they're not related. So a group, like a large group of unrelated animals in Dawkins's mind will disintegrate and basically fights will break out and it will become violent because they have no interest in forming a group like that. Mm-hmm. There's no biological reason. The interest of every animal is the survival and procreation. Yeah. It's the self-esteem. Yeah. So these people going out essentially, and they weren't hunting together. Mm-hmm. They weren't, and so some proposed explanations were, well, maybe they were facing a common threat, and that's why they banded together because they realized together they're stronger than a single individual. That wasn't the case. Or maybe they need to get into a group so they can hunt together because they're more effective and get more food. That wasn't the case either. I mean, literally, if you read the study, the scientists basically say just a bunch of friends taking a stroll in the woods. That's what it looked like, and they don't have another explanation of why several hundred young male gorillas will hang out for days, and they will neither fight nor hunt nor do anything aggressive. They're just sitting there, chill and eat leaves.
This is a paraphrase of one of Kropotkin's quotes, and it's solidarity is a natural law of greater importance than the struggle for existence, which is sung by the ruling class to stultify us. Yes, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, one more from Kropotkin. Sociability is as much a law of nature as the mutual struggle. Animals which acquire habits of mutual aid are undoubtedly the fittest. Sweet. Next one.
Parents' emotional trauma may change their children's biology. I think we've talked multiple times about that, but now it's become a very mainstream topic. Now it can no longer be denied. It used to be called controversial idea. Now it's no longer controversial, but now the attack against it is, well, it hasn't been confirmed in humans. There are some peripheral studies on Holocaust survivors, but all the studies that conclusively prove that you can have non-genetic inheritance, especially of trauma, of anything, right? Because unlike something like diabetes or obesity or cardiovascular disease, like when you're dealing with animals, how do you measure emotional trauma? Like it's not something that's easy to even diagnose in an animal. So they're saying like, well, until we see this replicated in humans, we don't believe it. But the cat is out of the bag. In the news is that everything you do, everything you perceive during your lifetime, every piece of the environment you interact with, it gets encoded in you and gets passed on to the future generations. And even this study basically said that the very thought of how much impact we have over the future generation, not just the next one, but at least 3 or 4, and I think posted another study which showed up to 14, at least in worms. It's scary just how much impact we have on future generations. So it should give many people a pause, or maybe at least reason for hope that even if you don't think that your life is necessarily good right now, you can make positive change for the future and that change will affect so many generations after you.
Well, I feel like this was first brought to my attention specifically in relation to autism, and Ray said that like the relationship between the mom and dad pre-conception was a contributor to autism, and I was like, oh, that's actually like, and again, that I'm sure you know about him, but that guy Saba, who the imprinting idea, and that being just a better explanation for inheritance or whatever, and passing down a pathology.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because the relationship between the mom and the dad will essentially control the mom's serotonin levels. And given how heavily serotonin is involved in the autism pathology, if the mother doesn't feel loved or supported, or if the child is not wanted, there are many other ways that the mom can be under stress. But any kind of a stressful event, especially if it's an emotional type of stress, which tends to be very pernicious because people can ruminate on it, right? It can be long gone, but they can still be causing themselves stressfulness just by thinking about it. So I'm not surprised at all. I mean, any kind of stress ultimately involves serotonin, and at this point, even the mainstream medicine is starting to think that serotonin is probably causally involved in autism. They're just saying that they don't know which receptor now. So now we have 7 serotonin receptors. So I think Big Pharma is hoping that by the time we figure out which one, they'll be able to sell a few more decades worth of SSRI drugs before the juries finally put an end to the sales.
And we'll talk more about this subject. So Emma Sarakis just $50 that will send to Mr. Ray Peat super chat. Thank you so much, Emma. And she says, hello, friends. Can't wait to join. So Emma is actually going to join us on the 9th, her 10th. So look for that. And so we will inject some female energy into this. Besides my female energy, we'll inject Emma's, and that should be a good show. So excited for that. And
yep.
Yeah. Okay, next article.
I think that's an article that a lot of people will like because there was a post on the forum about it as well. I posted a study not too long ago which showed that cheating is driven by cortisol, and more specifically by a high cortisol to testosterone ratio. And many people think that it's testosterone that's driving the cheating. It's testosterone that's making people immoral and basically making them do bad things and get away with it. No, actually, the study showed it's the cortisol doing that. It's the testosterone that's removing the fear of getting caught. But it's really the real impetus, the real drive, the real cause of cheating was cortisol, was stress. Mm-hmm. And what this study did, it was basically evaluate the effects of testosterone. And the great thing about the study is that it was an intervention study. They gave the participants testosterone injections. So they actually, unlike other studies which they're just epidemiological, they will look at the correlation between hormones and behavior. This one actually checked how behavior changes by people being given testosterone. So the stereotypes were that, testosterone will make both men and women not care about morals, be ruthless, have a propensity to cheat, be utilitarian. In other words, if they're driving a bus and then a child jumps on the road, and then basically they have a choice: either swerve to the left too steeply and they have a chance of avoiding killing the child, but also increase the chance of the bus flipping and killing people in the bus. Mm-hmm. So they were saying that people with high testosterone, people given testosterone, will choose to kill the child in the expense of not killing the 20 people on the bus. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that none of these assumptions was right. If anything, giving people testosterone actually made them kinder, more moralistic, or at least more respecting of morals, and more caring about the value of human life in absolute terms. In other words, it made people non-utilitarian. The person driving the bus given testosterone was actually willing to avoid killing the child without thinking so much about the people in the back of the bus. And some psychiatrists have made the call that this is the natural state of behavior, because when you're in this stressful situation, the only thing occupying your mind at that time, because we can't really parallel process, that's a myth. The only thing occupying your mind directly is the problem right in front of you, which is the child being in danger. So there can be no such consideration of calculating in parallel. Oh, do I save the people in the bus or do I save the child? Which the child dies or the people on the bus die? You can't have this. So the natural situation should be you have a human life that's in front of you, and that human life is in danger. What do you do? And testosterone made people even more caring, even more willing to do dangerous things to themselves, the driver, which the driver is also exposed to danger if the bus flips. They basically testosterone made people more willing to risk their own lives to save another life. Mm-hmm. So if anything, the article concludes that apparently none of the stereotypes that we have about testosterone are right. The best we can conclude right now is that we know nothing.
Well, I think
when it comes to testosterone.
I think I might have gotten this from you, but it was here's the full paper. But it's estrogenic encounters, how interaction between aromatase and the environment modulate aggression by Traynor. And the little section I had picked out was studies conducted in a wide variety of species indicate that estrogens modulate aggression. And it says aromatization, testosterone and estrogen within the brain may mask the relationship between androgens and aggressive behavior. And it's like fascinating to me how many people don't know that testosterone can aromatize into estrogen. Like even within bodybuilding and like nutrition circles, it seems to be something that isn't talked about that often.
Right. If you're given testosterone, they're assuming whatever your reaction is because of only testosterone, nothing else.
Yeah.
And it really it should be like, look, unless you've given me a really end of the pathway hormone. And by the way, we don't even know where the end of the pathway is, right? Mm-hmm. We thought it's dihydrotestosterone, but then they discovered androsterone and all the other hormones that are even further down the pathway. And now they discovered even other metabolites that are even further downstream of androsterone. So anyway, so whatever you give me, unless it's the very end of the pathway, then you can't really ascribe behavior just to that steroid because you have no idea what this thing is getting. Well, you have some idea what it's getting metabolized into, but not the whole idea. So yeah, but you're right. The aromatase has been shown that creating genetic mutants that actually are lacking aromatase completely makes them really, I don't want to say docile because they do fight when you annoy them, but it makes them very non-aggressive. In other words, they will not go and fight with like another animal over food or over access to like females or whatever they are. It's only when you give them aromatizable steroids or estrogen directly for the animals that don't have aromatase, only then they actually exhibit aggression. And it made me think about puberty and basically how puberty is a state of stress and it's driven by estrogen. And one of the defining features of puberty, which many people will tell you, like the stereotype is the crazy teenager, right? But what this really refers to is the aggressive teenager, the teenager that is willing to get into screaming matches with their parents, with his or her parents, or really vicious fights at school. And it only usually happens in puberty. Children aren't like that. Children can also be aggressive, but it's rare. In general, they're content to play with their toys and not really attack others without any provocation. Teenagers are not like that. They will sometimes actively seek out conflict, and most likely this is due to high estrogen.
What was it, David Butterworth? Is that the gentleman that interviewed you? You did a few interviews with David, which were excellent, and he interviewed Ray, and Ray said that girls now are hitting puberty at like 9, whereas he thought it was normal to hit puberty around 18, which is like nuts.
18?
Yeah, he said 18. I'm pretty sure. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said.
When I was, I must have been like 6 or 7, and at the time Bulgaria was still a communist country, so I don't know why. My uncle is a doctor. I was reading one of his medical books, and he's a gynecological surgeon. So it was basically, the book was on basically female reproductive medicine. And I remember reading that they were talking about puberty, and they said that the normal age of puberty in Bulgaria is between 13 and 14 years.
Right.
And I thought, oh wow, that's really old. Like that's because at the time I was like 6 or 7, so I thought, oh wow, that's like twice my age. And now I recently saw a publication again in Bulgaria, and they're saying that the age of puberty is between 8 and 9. So it's kind of like right there where like the general trend is earlier puberty which means, of course, shorter lifespan, poorer health, and in general, more aggressive, less empathetic people.
Crazy. Okay, so avoiding sunlight may be as bad for health as smoking a pack a day. Smoking a pack a day.
Smoking a pack a day. That's a great article. It's almost as if Ray wrote it. Because it covers so many different aspects of the benefits and the risks of sunlight exposure, right? So the article goes right into saying, look, yes, exposing yourself to sunlight. So it starts with a doctor who's been seeing a lot of patients. I think he was a dermatologist, and basically he noticed that all of his patients who had a lot of sunlight exposure had a wrinkled skin and a lot of skin cancer, but not melanoma, mostly the basal cell carcinoma and the squamous cell carcinoma. Mm-hmm. And those tend to be surface cancers and local, and they almost always stay localized, and almost nobody dies from them, even without treatment. Mm-hmm. And he noticed that the people with the cancers and the wrinkled skin were dramatically resilient, full of life and energy. They basically, were kicking, and, they were active, extremely active, even in very old age. And then on the contrary, he saw that the people who were avoiding sunlight or using heavy amounts of sunscreen, they had perfect skin, they looked perfectly healthy with soft, pink, amazing, young-looking skin, yet these people kept showing up with a number of really bad chronic conditions. Mm-hmm. That many of them were really dangerous and or potentially lethal. Mm-hmm. And he thought, what the hell is going on? Well, this article discusses a recent study done in Sweden. It's the largest of its kind. It covered 33,000 people and basically showed that exposure to sunlight corresponds with dramatic decrease in all-cause mortality, regardless of the conditions that people have. Not only that, it showed that even though, yes, the people with more sunlight exposure had more cancer, and actually even some of them even had more melanoma, these people had lower mortality than people without melanoma or without any cancers. So it really throws a wrench into what really means to be healthy, in my opinion. I mean, if you tell somebody you have melanoma or any kind of a cancer, by all standards of any modern Western medical system, you'll be considered quite sick, right? You'll be undergoing chemotherapy. They'll be trying to excise that tumor, burn it, right? All kinds of different procedures. And the doctors will be quite worried about you. And, you'll be considered a cancer survivor. Where apparently, based on that study, you have a dramatically lower chance of dying either from the cancer or any other condition, cardiovascular, neurodegenerative, autoimmune. First of all, you had lower risk of getting these things. And second of all, even if you did get them, you were at a dramatically lower risk of dying. Mm-hmm. Than if you did not actually have any sun exposure at all. And it was a so-called dose-response relationship. The more sunlight you got, the lower your chance of dying, and actually the longer your lifespan. So, and this one doctor who looked at the study said, if I didn't know any better, he's like, if I have to make a comment based on the data of the study, it looks like avoiding sunlight is as bad as picking up smoking, not just picking up smoking, but smoking a pack a day.
I mean, the sun it's sunny and hot here, but it's very cloudy. And so I haven't laid out for about probably a month or so. And it has a dramatic effect on me. It's really just that breaking up the day and go laying out in the sun. I mean, it's not surprising at all. It's really something I miss a lot when I can't go lay out. Yeah.
But I think it's the main point that I try to emphasize that article, that it kind of changes your idea of what it really means to be healthy, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. If the goal is not to die, mm-hmm, and to be as energetic and actually as systemically healthy as possible, mm-hmm, apparently it's perfectly fine to have cancer.
Yeah.
You'll have a lower chance of dying even if you give yourself cancer, and even if that cancer comes from the tanning beds, which do nothing but UV lights. Yes, because the study actually covered tanning beds, and even those people did better than the ones who avoided any sunlight exposure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is the people that looked better were they were unhealthier. Yeah.
They were actually dramatically less healthy than the people who looked a little bit older, wrinkled skin, it looked like people that work in the field, but those people were systemically healthier.
And then, not to speculate too much, but I haven't seen the article. I should try to track it down. But he was saying that a lot of the negative effects of sun exposure were because of the type of fat in the system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's saying that, take a little aspirin or a little niacinamide or like a little bit of coconut oil, to a large degree prevents like the lipid peroxidation, which is what most of the damage stems from. And of course, if you're deficient, then if you're deficient in the PUFA, then sunlight is actually not going to be that much of a danger. If you're really worried about that sunlight, then all you need to do is, sit and get exposed to a window, and that window absorbs most of the really dangerous, like the high energy UV light. So you're getting just a good portion of sunlight, and you're still synthesizing vitamin D.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay, last article. Sometimes to do nothing as cancer treatment is also a good medicine. We kind of talked about this already, right?
Kind of talked about it. Yeah. I wanted to post it because it's an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it's by a leading oncologist who essentially is making the call for saying that we are kind of over-treating cancer. Mm-hmm. We really don't know what cancer is, and he lists a number of different examples that. He says that every oncologist has patients who live with their cancer and they're perfectly fine. And he also gives a number of examples where patients were told, look, you're not a candidate for chemotherapy, you're not a candidate for surgery, you should get your affairs in order, and that's pretty much it. And then these people said, you know what, I refuse all further treatment. And guess what? These people outlived by many years all of the other patients who were candidates for therapy and who are getting the latest and greatest and most aggressive treatments that medicine had to offer. And another thing which I liked in that article is that this oncologist says, listen, for most of the cancers that we know, that we've studied, it actually takes decades for this cancer to get to the point where it's diagnosable, where it actually can cause a problem. So what that means is that given that cancer cells are present in almost every individual, most people are probably living with cancer without them even knowing. Mm-hmm. So if they can survive for decades without this cancer causing problems, and if we can choose for certain cancer types to do nothing, prostate cancer is probably a very good example, mm-hmm. Why can't this be done for all cancers? Mm-hmm. There is something deeply wrong by us targeting these specific cancers with these highly aggressive treatments, many of them lethal, but we refuse to recognize the fact that, of course it's anecdotal evidence because no trial has been done where people have not gotten any chemotherapy or radiation or surgery because it's considered unethical. But he's saying the anecdotal evidence that we have from every patient so far seems to be that if they refuse any treatments, they actually live longer and often dramatically longer than the people who got the latest and the greatest. Wasn't there a quote somewhere from Ray?
I have it right up here already.
If you choose to do nothing? Right?
Yeah, it's Hardin Jones from 1969, and he says, the possibility exists that treatment, radiation, chemotherapy, surgery makes the average cancer situation worse. And it says, neither the timing nor the extent of treatment of the true malignancies has appreciably altered the average course of the disease. The possibility exists that the treatment makes the average situation worse. And there was... I probably have it here, but this was probably the quote you were thinking of. It says, if one has cancer and opts to do nothing at all, he will live longer and feel better than if he undergoes treatment.
Yeah.
And that was
that's literally the gist of the message of the article. But this guy's a famous oncologist. He doesn't quite say it, but you can get from his tone. He's basically saying whatever it is that we're doing right now, it's not working. And my patients who choose to do nothing are doing dramatically better than everybody else who I ever treated.
Yeah, insane. Cool. Okay, just take a quick break to say, regurgitate all the things I said in the beginning. Consider subscribing if you're new. We do live streams every other week, Fridays at 6 p.m. PST. All super chats donated to Mr. Raymond Peat. And so if you actually do have a question, this would be the time to submit it because we're about to go through the super chats. Looks like the chat is great. I won't repeat the... Don't say crazy things. And yeah, I think that should cover it. Infinite thanks to Georgi Dinkov, my Bulgarian brother. Thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate it. You have reinvigorated my spirit for live streams, and so if you weren't here, these wouldn't be fun. So I sincerely appreciate this, just because Georgi is just being here from the goodness of his heart, making these shows what they are, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much, Georgi. And thank you to Steph.
Thanks to the audience and Emma and Steph and everybody else who is watching these things, because without them, we wouldn't be here either, right?
Thank you to the audience. Huge thanks to Steph. These have been so much fun. And I think we were chatting. We're on episode 7, and I was thinking like what are things going to be like at episode 100. So our long-term goal is just continue doing these, learn in the process, make them better. And the Patreon questions was one of the first things that's kind of like, that seems to kind of be starting to get a little bit boring. And so, it was, our commitment to you guys is that we're going to try to make these fun and interesting, and you don't want us like checking out and becoming monotone or me falling asleep or whatever. So, yeah. Okay, let me switch the screen here. Transition. And if you guys see Georgi's small window, we were having some technical difficulties today. I'm sure that will be remedied by the next stream. But again, learning as we go. Couldn't figure it out before we went live. Tried to, though. Okay, so we're going to read some super chats here. Craig Doe. Thank you so much, Craig, for $25 of some type, $1. I don't know. He says, great work, guys. 2 things in layman's terms: angiotensin system, how it affects blood pressure, and besides meds, alternative to balancing blood pressure out. Second, my friend has 2 uteruses. What happened? Mom's diet or too much estrogen or chemicals? So first question about angiotensin and blood pressure and presumably aldosterone, and then the second one about the friend's mom having 2 uteruses and how did that happen?
Yeah. So basically, the angiotensin is it's like a peptide that's released from the kidneys, right? And it regulates the blood pressure, and it's part of the so-called the renin-angiotensin system. It also regulates the synthesis of aldosterone and electrolyte balance as well as the vasoconstriction of the major blood vessels. So inhibiting the release of that peptide basically helps the blood vessels relax. But that's just one of the many mechanisms, right? So as we posted in a number of different studies, other hormones such as aldosterone and especially cortisol play a role. But it looks like the major cause of vascular stiffness and eventually vascular calcification is the activation of the aldosterone receptor, of the mineralocorticoid receptor, by cortisol, not by aldosterone itself, but by cortisol. Even though aldosterone itself, even in physiological levels / doses, it can raise blood pressure. So the angiotensin inhibitors are not bad drugs. They have some benefits that weren't expected when the drugs were developed. I think many people are familiar with the sartan drugs like telmisartan, losartan, and valsartan. And I think especially telmisartan is a drug that's relatively famous because athletes abuse it. It's abused as a performance-enhancing drug. It basically increases the number of mitochondria in the cell, and as such is used by athletes that do endurance type of sports. It's not entirely clear how it does that, but another drug, losartan, was shown to basically increase the synthesis rate of nucleotides on which the generation, the mitochondrial biogenesis depends. And there is also evidence that some of the angiotensin 2 inhibitors also inhibit the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. So in other words, they increase the levels of carbon dioxide in the body, and that also contributes to the increase in mitochondrial biogenesis.
And then do you have any idea about 2 uteruses? Just some kind of developmental thing?
So two uteruses sometimes, basically, sometimes it happens if the body was attempting to actually create two fetuses, and one of the process didn't complete entirely. I know people who have taken the drug clomiphene. It's usually given as a fertility drug. It is a SERM, selective estrogen receptor modulator. That drug is notorious for making women have twins or triplets or even higher number of babies, and or when they basically give birth to like a single baby or two babies, sometimes the males will have multiple penises, and or the females will have multiple uteruses or ovaries. So in my guess would be that estrogen is involved, because even though clomiphene is a SERM, it's actually highly estrogenic, especially in the brain. So it does something, it affects the brain of the fetus and the mother in a highly estrogenic way. And estrogen being a proliferating hormone and being highly responsible for the growth of the uterus, it's plausible that's one of the causes for having multiple uteruses.
I don't think you mentioned it, but PTH activates aldosterone, and this is one of the reasons Ray is a fan of calcium, and that David McCarran was the guy talking about calcium's anti-hypertensive effects. I'm sorry if you mentioned that.
Which one activates aldosterone?
Doesn't parathyroid hormone activate?
Yes.
Yeah, because
Yes.
David McCarran's work was finding that there was elevated PTH in hypertensive people. And how would you describe hypertension? Is it just like the rerouting of blood to the central organs and kind of the tightening of the vascular system?
Well, it's actually the perception of peripheral tissues of not getting enough oxygen or nutrients. And basically they send a signal which makes the heart pump harder and increase the blood flow, right? But if the vessels are constricted, they can't dilate to accommodate that extra flow.
Yeah.
And that extra, the increased pumping of blood, it creates an increased pressure because it's based on the area of the blood vessel.
Yeah.
And if the vessel can't expand, like a higher rate of flow at the same area will result in a higher pressure. So, and that stiffness, that calcification, eventually, it starts as a stiffness, but eventually becomes calcification, is apparently driven by the mineralocorticoid receptor, which is activated by aldosterone and cortisol in higher doses. And just as you said, parathyroid hormone increases aldosterone synthesis. It also increases serotonin, and serotonin is heavily involved in blood pressure, in high blood pressure as well. Every single anti-serotonin drug currently in use is known as a hypotensive drug as well. The most famous one being ketanserin, which is a highly selective / specific antagonist of the 5-HT2A receptor, and it's still considered the gold standard for rapid decrease in blood pressure in people that don't respond to beta blockers such as propranolol or angiotensin inhibitors. So if you don't respond to anything else, they will give you ketanserin, and so far ketanserin works 100% of the time.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that, Georgi. Shman Frontal says, as promised for Danny, last answer in the comments, I answered a question for him in the comments, but he didn't need to do that. But thank you so much for that, Shman Frontal. And we'll just send it to Ray Peat. James N for M for 20 pesos. What is Ray Peat's ethnicity / family history? If you can get a hold of the On the Back of a Tiger, like 3-hour interview with Ray, he talks about his family. His dad was like a sign maker. I think his mom was an artist at one point. He lived in Indio, California, I think was his family. And I don't actually know. I couldn't say what their ethnicity was. Do you know that by chance?
I have no idea. I mean, he looks Caucasian, but everybody's an immigrant here, so he must be from somewhere else. I know it's not a popular thing to say.
but I guess his dad he was like anti-war activities, like that would meet in his sign shop, he said. So he has like and he called his parents like co-conspirators, so seemed to probably have a pretty good relationship with them. He had a brother, but I don't really know that much information on that. And thanks to David, we know that his friend had a cat named Aphrodite. Did you hear that story?
Ray had a cat, and the name is Aphrodite?
Ray was talking about how he was talking to his friend's cat, and that he just had to speak clearly, and that the cat could understand what he was saying.
Ray thinks the cats understand.
You got to listen to it. I don't want to butcher it, but it's such a gem. It's like the 2019 Ray gem story, and David Butterworth in his last interview with him kind of got it out of him. It's pretty funny. Okay, another one from James M for 50 pesos. Thank you so much, James. He says, with enough raw materials, why is T3 underproduced? The negative side effects of supplementing it, many don't match its supposed action in the cell.
Because there are multiple thyroid inhibitors, so thyroid hormone is synthesized from the amino acid tyrosine, right? And then it also has iodine in it as well. The problem is that thyroid gland, for its proper functioning, depends on a number of different conditions. One, free fatty acids need to be low. Two, amino acids such as cysteine, tryptophan, and methionine also need to be low. Three, the hormonal balance needs to be optimal as well. Estrogen is a potent suppressor of the thyroid gland. So is cortisol. So is aldosterone. So is parathyroid hormone. They actually have an inverse relationship. So a number of different conditions need to be kind of like ripe and optimal in order for a thyroid gland to synthesize. And by the way, it synthesizes mostly T4, and then that T4 gets converted in the liver into T3. But either way, just because the thyroid gland is healthy doesn't mean it will be allowed to do its job. It depends on the environment. Ultimately, it is the environment, because if you're under stress, that will generate a specific hormonal milieu inside of you, and that will largely control whether the thyroid will take over or your adrenals will take over. So it's hard to force the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone when the signal from the outside is thyroid shouldn't be in charge, cortisol should be in charge.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. There's a $1 super chat for a message redacted. So thank you for that, whoever you are. Javier says, tips to protect yourself from long sun exposure. Kind of went over this.
I think I mentioned it just a few months ago. Basically, aspirin, niacinamide will be great. Caffeine is actually a like a sunscreen. I think a chemical version of it. It protects from DNA damage, which is what the UV lights do, and that's part of their carcinogenic effect. It doesn't protect so much from the lipid peroxidation, but for that you can do vitamin E, you can do aspirin, and you can do niacinamide. Would be my top 3 choices. And or if you don't have any supplements, simply increasing the amount of saturated fat largely prevents the peroxidation effects from happening in the diet. So a few spoons of coconut oil or just eating more butter largely negates the negative effects.
Schman Frontal says, what causes hypothyroidism, e.g. low heart rate, temp, dandruff, even if lab values are very good? We've tested reverse T3, but it's good too. Under eating, maybe?
Under eating can cause it, but basically you don't have to have. So, for example, elevated free fatty acids can prevent the thyroid from actually binding to its receptor, and also they increase the speed with which thyroid hormone dissociates from its receptor. The polyunsaturated fats can actually act as thyroid receptor antagonists, and so you can actually be producing normal amounts of thyroid hormone, and you can be converting enough of it into T3. But if that receptor at the cell, inside the cell, if it's being blocked by a high level of polyunsaturated fatty acids, then you will have what's called functional hypothyroidism, in spite of the normal lab values. So one of the things that I've noticed help a lot of people that don't respond well to thyroid is just taking a little bit of aspirin and niacinamide just to lower the free fatty acids. Usually dramatically increases their response even to very low doses of T3. And even if that doesn't help, then it's usually some kind of a either low-grade endotoxin overload can also prevent you from responding to thyroid, or there is a chronic infection going on somewhere. And then the latter one, I think Ray has mentioned in a few of his interviews. People asked him, like, I don't respond to even high doses of T3. And Ray said, if you don't respond to 50 micrograms, which in his opinion is a huge dose, then you may want to do some additional tests, like a complete blood count, or some other biomarkers that can point to a potentially chronic bacterial infection somewhere.
Sweet. And I don't know if I read it, but Schmann Frontals was for £5 or euros, I think. So thank you for that. And thank you, Javier, for the $2 donation. Shafiel an hour for $4.99. Thank you so much, Shafiel, or I won't even try. How to mitigate the effects of the white, blue, yellow lights if you don't have access to red light? Would you know where to get good quality red light?
So I don't know about good quality red light. I think any red light bulb over 100 watts would be good, in my opinion. And you only need one to really get the benefits. But more light bulbs will allow you to achieve more with shorter exposure. I have two, and one of them is actually so basically I have two LED bulbs. Each one of them has 8 LED diode, 8 LED units inside. Each bulb is 50 watts. I bought them from Amazon, and basically have two lights of 50 watts each, but they are rated as being equivalent to a 200-watt incandescent light bulb. Mm-hmm. So I essentially have the light equivalent of 400 watts of red light. But you don't need that much. I have two lights, but only one is turned on. You don't need both. I feel like even one is enough for me. So if you can buy, like I said, you don't have to go fancy. Anything on Amazon or any other location that sells incandescent or LEDs that are in the 650 nanometer spectrum, up to 700 is probably going to be good enough. Even green and yellow light bulbs have benefits. Green light, I think, was found to be especially good for promoting long restorative sleep, deep restorative sleep. So if red is not available, yellow or green should work, or orange should work just as well, or even the regular white incandescent light should be fine. And in terms of protecting yourself, most of the effects of blue and fluorescent lights is due to the inhibition of cytochrome C oxidase. And if you don't have the red light to oppose that, other good chemical antagonists of the blue light would be methylene blue, or magnesium or zinc, all of which tend to remove that block that red light is causing on that crucial enzyme cytochrome C oxidase.
Thank you for that. Shafi also says for $1.99, thank you so much. He says, what is the cause of autism, serotonin, nutrition? So the elevator pitch for what causes autism.
The causes are multiple, but serotonin, at this point, there is serious evidence that serotonin is a major cause, both because multiple studies have shown that women who use SSRI drugs, their children have a much higher rate than what is even already a very high rate in the general population. I think the general population at this point is 2.5%. And women who are using or have used SSRI drugs, even before they got pregnant, even if they stopped it, even if they stopped the drugs during the pregnancy, I think the rate for those women is about 17%. So serotonin is most certainly involved. Other things that seem to be involved is also a general hypothyroid state. Now, serotonin itself actually has a direct toxic effect on brain cells, especially the dopamine-producing cells. So it can create, and I posted a few studies about that Parkinson's disease is now actually been shown to be, most of the symptoms to be caused by excessive serotonin and not by a lack of dopamine. But it's serotonin that seems to have a toxic role in killing those dopamine-producing cells in the substantia nigra. And many people with autism seem to also have movement disorders, which are heavily correlated with some kind of a damage in the dopaminergic system of the brain. So in my opinion, serotonin is a prime cause, and other probably less major causes, of course, hypothyroidism is right up there with serotonin, but things such as, protein deficiency can probably cause it, in my opinion. Salt, not eating enough salt, not only because because the serotonin transporter, which deactivates serotonin, not only because it's dependent on sodium, but also because general lack of sodium in the diet tends to increase the stress system, the sympathetic nervous system. So high adrenaline, not so much noradrenaline, but high adrenaline, high cortisol, these things also tend to damage the brain of the fetus, or at the very least steer its direction towards a very a very very short attention span and a lack of empathy, which are some of the defining features of autism. So poor nutrition can definitely cause autism, in my opinion. Extensive exposure to EMF, especially I actually several women wrote to me that they slept with their Bluetooth earpieces on, and they were using them all the time while they were pregnant, and they're pretty certain that that's contributing because they didn't use SSRI drugs. Their diet was pretty good. Not a single person in their family history has had autism. So the only thing they can ascribe this to is that they actually used EMF emitting devices, and two of the women actually were diagnosed also with meningiomas. These are benign tumors of the meninges, so it's kind of like a brain tumor. It's not malignant, but it's heavily associated with EMF exposure. The singer Sheryl Crow was diagnosed recently with a cancer, with a tumor of that type, and in her case, the doctor actually directly told her that it's most likely because of her habit, because of her addiction to her cell phone. And she said that she used to be on the phone with her mom for 5 to 6 hours a day, on a daily basis.
Wow.
And the doctor basically agreed that, in his opinion, that's probably the direct cause. Ionizing radiation, a huge factor as well. So if a pregnant woman has to get any dental work, I would either postpone it or categorically refuse to get X-rays, even though, of course, the doctor will tell you, oh, it's the same amount of dosage, the same amount of exposures you're getting from a flight from DC to LA. None of that's true. We know about the difference in absorbance based on altitude, and also the dentist will tell you, but it's localized. We're only irradiating your jaw. Yeah, but the jaw is very close to the brain. And remember, brain controls everything. The brain of the mom is a very intimate and powerful effect on the development of the fetus. Anything that affects that brain negatively will likely affect the development of the fetus as well. So avoidance of ionizing radiation and other things. I think many pregnant women are being told to take multivitamin supplements that are very heavy on iron. I don't understand the rationale for that unless there is proven iron deficiency. So if the doctor is pushing you to take these, and many of the prenatal vitamins are really, really heavy on iron, so you can actually get iron toxicity. So if the doctor is pushing you to take prenatal vitamins, I would ask for an iron test first, not just serum iron, but the whole iron panel with ferritin, transferrin, and iron saturation index before you agree to any of these barbaric treatments.
Thank you for that, Emma, for the 50 Australian dollars. Thank you so much, Emma. Hello, friends. Can't wait to join in. And just a reminder, she'll be here on the 9th of August to join us. Super excited. Corey P. for $5 says, what are the best ways to protect, fortify the body against vaccines? Thank you both.
Several studies have shown that just good nutrition is enough. So, but you have to take the vaccines. Some of the things that help would be increasing, by the way, the amount of reactive oxygen species produced. And I posted a study showing that just having like a higher rate of ROS production can actually detoxify the body from a number of the endocrine disruptors and toxins that are present in the water supply or the food supply. And among those toxins, we're also listed a number of adjuvants that are present in the vaccine as well. So, and some of the adjuvants used to be mercury, but I think now they've replaced it with aluminum and squalane and some other organic and inorganic chemicals that are triggering an immune reaction. And basically, you can prevent many of those side effects by simply keeping metabolism high. Other adjuvants that are put in the vaccines are known to be activators of the TLR4 receptor. So things that block that receptor will probably negate to a great degree the damage that these adjuvants are doing. So things like cyproheptadine, any anti-serotonin chemical should help. But in general, the tricyclic older antidepressants such as nortriptyline, amitriptyline, cyproheptadine, Niacinamide, even Benadryl actually has a serotonin antagonist effect and is a known TLR4 antagonist as well. Naltrexone would be another good one. So aspirin would probably not be a bad idea either, because aspirin lowers both histamine and serotonin contents in the blood, and a number of studies have shown that the rate of adverse reactions to vaccine is very highly positively correlated with the amount of plasma serotonin, and aspirin lowers that. So that would be a good and cheap way to protect yourself.
Sweet, thank you, Brian Thomas, for $20. Thank you so much, Brian. He says, a friend of mine has a third kidney from a kidney transplant and now is required to take immunosuppressants for the rest of her life. What can she do to get off of that or lower her need for it, if anything?
I don't know if there's anything that can be done to get off of it completely, simply because that kidney is from another person, and she will always be producing antibodies to the organ. So unless she wants to get the body to reject it, some sort of an immunosuppressant will probably be needed. There are some older studies that show that progesterone may be able to dampen that excessive immune response, and can prolong the tolerance of what they call an allograft. In other words, a foreign organ that's being transplanted. But I don't know of any human studies recently that have been done with progesterone. To me, the progesterone will be the safest immunosuppressant. It's not an immunosuppressant. It simply dampens an excessive immune reaction, which would be the case for a transplanted organ. But other than that, I for as long as you have the transplant, I think some kind of immunosuppression will be needed.
Sweet. Thank you for that, Brian. James for 20 pesos says, does Ray believe in God? Seems not. I don't think we can answer that. but I think Arian in the chat said that Ray has said that his own view was closest to David Griffin's process theology. But if I don't know. Me and you have talked about this. Ray has a more...
You interviewed Ray, and he directly answered it. You basically said, you said basically, so you have to jump to like a create. So if you believe in a creator, you're kind of jumping to conclusions that haven't yet happened. Mm-hmm. And Ray said that yes, if you have to jump means you're not there.
Yeah.
So you're making like a leap of faith. And to him, God was existence, consciousness, the process of things always being like this process of continuous creation, things always happening with your participation.
Yeah.
To him, that was the equivalent of what people call God.
Yeah, and he mentioned that he thought like the religions place God in creation somewhere else, but that he thought it was happening at the local, the local level. And he also... for anybody that listened to my conversation with Jay Dyer, I asked Ray about Jay's type of philosophy, and Ray, and you'll be able to articulate this better than I can, but he thinks everything has a field and nothing has a private independent field. And so this is, I think it's similar to that process theology where everything is always changing because every substance's field is interacting with another field, and therefore it's constantly under revision. And so
scientifically, the theory that describes this is the David Bohm version of quantum mechanics. Mm-hmm. So he basically talks about a global wave and everything being affected and interacting with each other. So he basically, in quantum physics, he says that the configuration and the state of every elementary particle in the universe is dependent all the time, instantaneously, in real time, on the configuration of every other particle in the universe. Mm-hmm. So in a very real sense, you and I and everything else that exists is interacting with, continuously modified and modifying everything else in the universe as well. And it happens in real time as we speak right now. The speed of light is not a barrier to that. It's not a limiting factor.
Sweet, yeah, and that brings up questions of ether and where the matter is coming from, which yes. I don't know answer those questions. Thank you for that, James. Movie Bomb for $2 says, how high should temperature be later in the night?
I would say anything above, I would say 99 degrees is probably ideal. Anything higher than 99.5 tends to make people sweat. And basically at some point they will probably wake up from thirst, because once you start losing enough water, eventually thirst will kick in and you'll wake up. So anything that you can maintain, anything above 98 degrees, in my opinion, that allows you to maintain uninterrupted sleep. So for some people, they actually have a really high set temperature point. And I know people who have a temperature in the hundreds, It's not it's 100.4, something like that. And I think that's like this is the limit at which after that they call it a fever, at least for newborns. And I know people who do that and maintain that set point by using the uncoupler dinitrophenol, and they sleep like babies through the night. But I also know others who, if they raise their temperature above 98 degrees, they have to wake up every 2 hours and drink something. So I think it depends highly on your individual state of health. Like I've noticed that people with extra amount of body fat, they cannot tolerate higher temperatures that well. They tend to get thirsty very easily. They wake up very easily, and they have to drink or eat just to maintain their blood sugar stable. So yeah, my idea would be, at least for me, I've noticed that it's around 99 degrees. I know people who do well with a higher one, and I know people who cannot do more than 98, and it really is dependent on the individual health state.
And Steph M for $31.41. Thank you so much, Steph. So we raised $136 for Ray, plus whatever Google tax that is. But I think Google just sent me $100, which I need to send to Ray. So this is really good. So I'm excited. Thank you guys so much for those super chats. We are going to take a call. And this will probably be a shoot show, but we're going to try it anyways. So let me close this. Let me change the screen. And so you should be able to see the phone number now. I honestly have no idea how this is going to go. But so that is the number to call. And then that we should be able to talk to you. But this like barely worked when we tested it before the show. Jason Herrera says, thanks, Danny and Georgie. Appreciate your wisdom. Thank you so much, Jason. I know Jason. He's a great dude. So thank you so much for that. Yeah. Okay. No calls yet, but we'll just hang out until we get one and see what happens.
I thought your mom was calling, but now you yell at her.
She's probably legitimately mad at me because I didn't respond to her phone call.
Yes.
But so we'll give it a few more minutes. Anything else on the horizon, Georgie? What are you working on right now?
I'm actually working on 2 new products. One of them would be a fatty acid oxidation inhibitor if everything works fine. Similar but much more potent than the drug mildronate. I think I mentioned this the last time. And also I'm looking at 2 anti-serotonin chemicals. One of them is a TPH inhibitor similar to phenclonine, but it's much more potent. It's a similar chemical, but it's much more potent and much more longer lasting. So you should be able to achieve the same by using a much smaller dosage, and as such, hopefully limiting the risk of side effects. The other one is a serotonin antagonist, which is a derivative of camphor. And Ray holds camphor in very high esteem, so do I. There are multiple studies. This is one of the most ancient drugs in usage. It's probably about as ancient as aspirin, maybe even more ancient, because the ancient Egyptians were using camphor as a drug and as an embalming chemical long before they started writing about using willow bark and willow bark extracts. So those are 2 anti-serotonin chemicals and one fatty acid oxidation inhibitor, and one other chemical which Ray mentioned only once in one interview, but he spoke so highly of it that I've been on the hunt for that for the last 3 years. The chemical name is hyperforin, and it's present in the herb St. John's wort. Mm-hmm. And Ray, in that interview, I think it was a KMUD interview, he basically said it was, so the Russians in the 50s and the 60s did a lot of research with it, and this drug apparently can cure, that was the word he used, and I've looked at the studies, they use the same language. It can cure any psychiatric condition in a matter of hours and with a single dose only. So it will be very interesting if we can get that. Structurally, it's similar to the chemical artemisinin, which now many people in the forum and outside the forum are using as cancer treatment. So it's a structurally similar chemical, and it does act as a redox balancer. Of course, it shifts the probably one of the main reasons it's so effective.
Okay. You know, we're getting our first call. Okay, so we'll see how this goes. Hello, you are on the air. Who is this? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, is Georgi still there with me?
I'm here.
Okay. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself? You are on the air.
Yeah, I'm Ricky.
Hey, Ricky.
And I'm calling from Texas. I think I've spoken with you on the video call before.
Oh, cool. On Patreon?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I think I remember. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. So, I had a question. What could cause the body to feel like it's overheating in just a simple 75-degree normal weather, but the core temperature auxiliary seems to be 97.8, 98, not above that, and the body feels like it's burning up, and you have to cool down. Otherwise, you have like a huge bowel movement, and it's just very uncomfortable.
Georgi?
Yes, I've actually experienced this myself, and I know people who have done blood tests. Most of the cases, it's due to high serotonin / endotoxin, which coincides with, you said that basically there is a bowel movement involved as well. So I've noticed that just even like a 1 or 2 milligrams of cyproheptadine or ondansetron very quickly brings down that feeling of excessive heat. So as far as I'm concerned, it's driven by excessive serotonin, but the ultimate cause is the endotoxin, the increased permeability. So aspirin may help as well, but my personal experience is that anti-serotonin drugs are pretty good and pretty quick at getting this under control.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. All good, Ricky?
Yeah, thanks, sir. I appreciate you guys.
Cool, brother. Thank you for calling. Talk to you soon.
You got it.
All right, bye. Wow, I can't believe that worked. Oh my God.
Awesome.
Amazing. Does anybody else want to call in? We'll continue talking about the new Idea Labs products, but give us a call and we'll stop and chat a little bit. I'm like flabbergasted that worked, because this was really not working when we tried this out. This is so much fun. Okay, Georgi, pick up. I was going to ask you about Fisetin. Did you know that's like something Ray has mentioned a few times? But
yeah, it's one of the flavonoids in orange juice. Mm-hmm. So it's basically, I think it's similar structurally to naringenin and apigenin. And I found out, I'm guessing one of the reasons Ray holds them in such a high esteem is that both apigenin and naringenin are actually phytoprogestogens. Mm-hmm. So they activate both the progesterone receptor A and B. They're slightly weaker than progesterone in terms of affinity and how well they activate it, but they are among the most potent natural phytoprogestrogens, and which means they're opposing estrogen at the receptor level. And I think the fact that Fisetin, one of its most widely recognized effects is that it basically opposes clotting. Mm-hmm. I think in some countries it actually is used as a clot busting natural medicine, which corroborates the idea that Fisetin is probably also a phytoprogestogen and works as an antagonist of estrogen. Mm-hmm. But you can buy Fisetin; it's available on Amazon. It's isolated. I don't know how good quality it is, but I just didn't think that there'll be a need for it because people can either buy as a supplement or drink it from orange juice.
Yeah, I don't know why. That was one of the things I've heard him drop that a few times, and I wasn't sure what it was about. But I kind of interrupted you. You were talking about the second supplement though. Yeah,
the hyperforin is a chemical. The structure is similar to artemisinin. You may have seen it in the news, not in the news, but actually, University of Arizona is running large-scale clinical trials for cancer with artemisinin. And they're trying to patent certain variations of it, so it will probably start hitting the news more than it is now. But there've been quite a few discussions on the forum and on the internet as well that it's basically artemisinin is this semi-quinone.
Oh, you know what? We're getting a call. Okay. Okay, hello. You are on the air with me and my buddy Georgi. Who is this?
Oh, this is Nathan.
Nathan, how are you, sir?
Pretty good. How are you, man?
Good. What was your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about like exercise in general, and I know there's some differing opinions on how often and what types, and I just wanted to get you and Georgie's opinion on it.
Cool, Georgi. Do you want to dig in?
Yeah, so I know there's many people think that Ray is against the so-called endurance exercise. I think he mentioned several times, and I agree that if you can maintain a run or riding your bicycle at a pace where you can maintain a normal conversation, it means you're still producing enough carbon dioxide and you're not raising your lactic acid level to the point where it becomes detrimental. So keeping the pace to the level where you can maintain conversation is important. And also keeping the so-called endurance exercise not too long, maybe like no more than 45 minutes to an hour is important, because after that you will probably have depleted your glycogen, and then even a low-intensity exercise will switch you into the oxidation of fatty acids. And you can actually sense that moment, because while you're running on glycogen, you'll feel like your muscles have a significant amount of strength, of power. And then after you switch to fatty acid oxidation, basically like the explosive power of the muscles declines, because you're switching from using the so-called wide muscle fibers to the red slow twitch muscle fibers that are relying mostly on oxidation of fat. So you'll be able to run longer, but you will feel like your strength is diminishing. And that usually, it depends a lot on the person, but usually 45 minutes to an hour is enough to deplete the glycogen, and then at that point I would stop. And in terms of strength exercise, resistant exercise, almost any exercise in any amount is good, as long as you're not getting to the point where your muscles are sore for multiple days at a row. It probably means you're overtraining. And Ray said something like just using a few light dumbbells and doing like 10 to 15 minutes a day is fine. I think you can do more. Like if you're into bodybuilding, there's no harm in doing more, as long as you're not getting to the point where you need either steroids to recover, or you have multiple days of muscle soreness. That means you're overexerting yourself. To me, and I think there was a study that did like an analysis of what's the optimal frequency of resistance training, and they said 3 times a week at 45 minutes was optimal. That is what generated the most amount of muscle mass and lost the most amount of fat, while also keeping muscle breakdown and kidney damage, which can happen if you overtrain yourself, at a minimum level. So if nothing else, if you want to start, my guidelines will be try the 45 minutes 3 times a week, but be cognizant this is not a golden rule. Monitor how quickly you recover, and if it takes you like 2 or 3 days to get back into shape and be able to lift again, it means that's too much. So I would scale down. And if not, you can do more.
Awesome. Wow. Very informative. Danny, you got anything to say about that?
The only thing I would add is I think I have like a 1947 reference of the Merck manual, and they list hypothyroidism, and then they list all the symptoms. And then towards the end of that, they say something like exercise should be stopped or greatly restrained if a person is hypothyroid. And so, again, I don't think anybody should take their exercise advice from me, but like I just feel like the majority of people I talk to that are really into exercise, it would probably benefit them to stop their exercise, So that's like literally my only point of view on it.
Okay, cool, man. I appreciate it, guys.
Cool, brother. Thank you so much for calling. Okay, we have another
Take it
call.
easy.
This is incredible. I am so excited. Okay, hello. You are on the air with me, Danny, and Georgi. Who is this?
Hey, James here.
Hey, James. How are you, sir?
Good. Quick question. Theoretically, what do you think is the best way to make the body more conductive? Electrically conductive.
Georgi?
Keep the levels of free fatty acids low. They actually act as insulators, and I don't know if you know, but the potency of anesthetics correlates highly with their solubility in oil. And a number of different fatty acids are actually known for their anesthetic effects, and they can even put you into a coma if they're injected intravenously. Even saturated fats can do that. And it shows you, and well, it hasn't been proven conclusively, but one of the leading theories is that if you assume that consciousness is electronic and depends on the flow of electrons, the fact that fatty acids as insulators, especially at the nerve level, suggests that they decrease, well, if not the conductance, they decrease the flow of electrons through the channels that create consciousness. So my advice would be keeping lipolysis low through aspirin, niacinamide, or any other drug, or in general keeping stress low, because it's stress that increases the amount of free fatty acids in the blood.
Did you catch that? I know
so mineral
there's
balance. Yeah, mineral balance. You don't think would be a big factor?
It will contribute, but in general, like basically, unless you're severely depleted in all of the minerals, it probably wouldn't be that big of a factor, because most of the minerals, at least the four major ones, they can fill in for each other's role. So so let's say if you're deficient on something like calcium and sodium, or even magnesium, it will be very hard to be deficient in potassium, because potassium is in the cell and it's tightly bound to cell proteins. Unless the cell ruptures, it will be very difficult to have potassium deficiency. So unless you're somehow deficient in all of these ions, then I don't think it will play that big of a role in regulating conductance.
Right. Thank you.
Cool, brother. Thank you for calling. We have another call. This is so fun. Hello, you are on the air with Danny and Georgie. Who is this?
Hi, this is David. How you doing?
Hey, David. How are you?
Oh, I'm awesome. Big fans of you guys. Super cool to be online with you guys right now.
Yeah, total pleasure. Do you have a question for Mr. Georgi Dinkov?
I do. I'm 46 years old. I started going bald probably, 26, 27. I'm not worried about the baldness or anything like that anymore. I'm cool having a shaved head, but the issue that I'm having now at 46 is prostate. I think is pretty big. So, I get up a lot at night to have to urinate, and it's driving me nuts. I've bought a lot of supplements from Georgi. I've been doing the Peat stuff for a long time. I caught wind of Peat, just doing searches on high iron. I learned at a really young age that I had high iron, so I made the connection between the high iron, the heart disease, and the baldness, and all that. And then I've just been learning a lot of stuff, but I don't know what to do. I've tried everything. I've done the thyroid. I haven't done too much of the antibiotics, so I'm just looking for any suggestions.
So two direct causes that I've seen confirmed multiple times in studies with humans, two direct causes of prostate problems are endotoxin and adrenaline. In fact, apparently now there is a push in some states, not all of them, but basically the drugs, the beta blockers like propranolol or clonidine are actually used to treat benign prostate hyperplasia. I don't know exactly what kind of condition you have on the prostate, but if it's basically prostatitis or benign prostate hyperplasia, adrenaline and or endotoxin are likely involved. You can try one of those drugs to see if it's the adrenaline angle. If it's the endotoxin, then I didn't catch. Did you try antibiotics, or you didn't yet, or you're considering them? But charcoal.
I do charcoal here and there. I've done it enough to know that it didn't solve the problem. It's probably helping.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so I ordered some antibiotics here recently, and so I'm going to try those out. I feel pretty confident. And I was also curious too, Georgie. There for a while I was doing high doses of niacinamide based on some recommendations you had made, and I'd sleep really good, but I felt like I probably was even more frequent, getting up and having to go to the bathroom. But it felt like it was more of a therapeutic, relief.
Okay.
So, and now I'm kind of doing like the low dose niacinamide throughout the day. Just kind of experimenting with both. What are your thoughts on that?
I think niacinamide, it has a very potent anti-inflammatory effect as well. So that may be what's kind of like solving the immediate problem, which is the irritation of the prostate. But as
Right.
far as addressing the endotoxin angle, if you don't want to do the antibiotics, anti-serotonin drugs, and especially the blockers of the 5-HT3 receptor, such as ondansetron or any other 5-HT3 blocker, have been shown to be able to kind of seal the gut barrier and almost completely prevent the absorption of endotoxin in the bloodstream. So and that should largely eliminate the irritation of the prostate, which is caused by the endotoxin. So if endotoxin is the issue. So but that's what I've seen. Either adrenaline or endotoxin are the direct causes of most issues with the prostate. And then as you get older, the increase of the estrogen to the androgens ratio can cause other things, including prostate cancer. But I don't think you're at that level yet.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. So those drugs you mentioned, are those prescription-only drugs, or those drugs you can acquire online?
Ondansetron, I think you can actually buy it as a veterinary drug. I know when I searched for it online, I found a few websites in the States where you can actually buy it for horses and cats and even dogs. And if you don't have that, then you can try probably even cyproheptadine or even ketothione, but they're non-selective serotonin antagonists. And the studies that I've seen for prostate and endotoxin, specifically on ondansetron, which is the main drug used for nausea, it's widely available. If you go to a doctor and say like you have nausea, you'll probably get a script like that. They won't even test you for anything. It's such a benign drug, and it's given to pretty much everybody with any complaints about nausea or indigestion.
Okay, can I ask one more last question?
Sure.
So would you recommend doing, if I, you think that there's a chance that the antibiotics might solve the problem if I were to do it? My thoughts are doing small doses all throughout the day, kind of spread it out. What are your thoughts?
What kind of antibiotics are you using?
I was going to try penicillin.
Penicillin?
What was that?
Penicillin?
Penicillin. So usually, to me, like a sign that the antibiotic is working is basically increasing the frequency of bowel movements without causing diarrhea. So it's like if you used to have like one bowel movement before, even less frequently, and now you're having like 3 after every meal without getting diarrhea, to me that's a sign that the antibiotic is working. If you're not getting that effect, then it's probably, even though it's decreasing endotoxin, it's not killing off the microbiome to the point where it's really reducing the endotoxin therapeutically.
Okay, so yeah, 'cause I don't usually have diarrhea, but a lot of times I will have constipation. That's real common for me. So, and my stomach has become more bloated. I used to do a lot of fasting, but now like my stomach is now that I'm feeling better. I think my adrenaline's low. I think it's endotoxin though. I think that's what it is. I'm calmer. I feel really good and stable. I have good energy, and my muscle mass has been building. A lot of positives, but it's just the urination thing is just like my hang up.
Cool. Thank you so much for calling, David. We'll probably take one more call. Thank you so much. Hello, David? Oh. Still there? Oh, I hope I didn't boot him off. I don't think I did.
You probably thought like you're trying to cut him off or something.
I was going to let him finish. I was just going to take this one last call. David, I apologize. I didn't. I don't know what happened there. Okay, one last call. Hello, you are on air with Danny and Georgie. Who's this?
Oh, hi. It's James calling from England.
Hey, James. How are you?
Hi there, man. I thought I'd just jump on the back of that last antibiotic question. I'm suffering from extreme stress and anxiety. Every second of every day is just filled with this feeling of dread and OCD and anxiety. All the typical repeat things aren't really working, like the niacinamide, the aspirin, etc. T3, pregnenolone. Nothing can just give me a temporary bit of relief to be able to like change my whole lifestyle, and I need something to help me. So I'm going down this antibiotic route. And I'm on like day 4 of amoxicillin. I'm just wondering, it's not doing anything. Do I just forget that and move on to the next one?
Can I answer? I feel like I'm a cheerleader for antibiotics, but I feel like out of all the things Ray has talked about, they're one of the things that have like reliably improved my quality of life. And I felt comfortable taking antibiotics because Ray would specifically mention penicillin and the macrolides and tetracyclines specifically as being safer versions of antibiotics, you know? And, I don't know, man. I feel like there have been times where I've been in a blue mood for no apparent reason. Like my life is very good, and I have no real. Like if I'm obsessed with the past or something, that's not really normally me. And so there have occasionally been times where I've taken some minocycline or some erythromycin or clarithromycin or penicillin, or even combine them together, and it seems like it will change my mood and my patterns of thinking like very quickly. You know, and so I don't know if you're not experiencing any benefits from penicillin specifically. I don't know if it would be worth getting a macrolide and combining it, or trying minocycline, because to me at least, each antibiotic seems to have different effects. You know, so I wouldn't give up if just one didn't have any function. What are your thoughts, Georgie?
So specifically, the feelings of dread and constant anxiety, at least in the the human studies that I've seen, are highly correlated to either lactic acid or serotonin, and they often go hand in hand. So I have several clients who reported dramatic relief from even very low dose of methylene blue, to the point where even 1 milligram, just a few drops, it completely eliminated their anxiety. And older studies achieve the same by using either vitamin B1 thiamine, either alone or in combination with the carbonic anhydrase blocker acetazolamide. So methylene blue does the same. Ultimately, the mechanism of action is lowering lactic acid and increasing carbon dioxide. And in hospitals, sometimes when you go to the ER and you're having a panic attack, they're asking you to breathe in a paper bag, or they will give you to breathe from a bottle that has 5% carbon dioxide gas inside of it. If you haven't tried breathing in a paper bag, you can try that just as a test of whether it's the lactic acid carbon dioxide angle. And if that's not helping much, then the next thing I would try is, there are multiple studies that show that serotonin antagonists are pretty reliable anxiolytic drugs. So to me, that would be the safer way than doing things like, the which are highly addictive, and they ultimately working through a very similar mechanism to what the blocking serotonin does as well. It allows the GABA system to take over, and it's usually it's the suboptimal GABA signaling that's causing the anxiety. And the two things that block GABA from doing its work is either high lactic acid or high serotonin. So trying to regulate either one of these is usually therapeutic.
The bizarre thing for me is I've tried so many anti-serotonin agents, though I haven't tried methylene blue, I will say. But I've tried very high doses of cyproheptadine. I've tried tianeptine. I've tried things that even benzodiazepines, and something like phenibut doesn't even touch my anxiety. It's so strange. But I will try methylene blue.
Have you had lab tests for things like vitamin D and your thyroid function and things?
Yeah, my vitamin D is not great. It's 25 on the American units that they use. I'm trying to get as much sun as possible in, the UK weather's horrendous, but every time I can get a bit of sun, I will get it.
It would probably be useful to use a supplement, because that can have a profound effect on mood and orientation and wanting to do things. Like even a time in Mexico when I was making time to lay out every day, I felt like I benefited from taking a supplement. So I was getting probably an hour of sun every single day. And even when doing that, I thought 2,000, 4,000 IU was helpful for me. And so, especially and it's something so simple that it doesn't have to be like, a magic mix of antibiotics or anti-serotonin drugs. Like, you don't want to do that if you don't have to,
So I guess the question from that I'm wondering is, what's the max vitamin D supplement I could take per day? What's safe? And I've tried the antibiotics. I'm on day 4 of amoxicillin. I've been taking 3 500 milligram tablets for 4 days. Sorry, this is the 4th day. It's not doing anything for me at all. Should I just kind of try a different one or try these other things now? Or do I need to give amoxicillin a longer time to just write that one off? That's not going to work for me.
I would actually suggest doing some blood tests for steroids. Things like high cortisol.
They're all sky high.
Which one's sky high?
Well, cortisol. And then I've done the 24-hour urine Dutch. I don't know how reliable Dutch is, but it does correlate really well with what I'm experiencing, like pregnenolone, all the sub-metabolites of pregnenolone, and same with progesterone. They're all, every one of them is just so high, including cortisol. So I really am.
Go ahead, Georgi.
Yeah, I was going to say that right there, the very high cortisol would directly explain the feeling anxiety. I don't know if you've how high it is, but if you've only done the Dutch test, I would follow that up with a blood test, because the Dutch test on its own it's not entirely reliable. So if you do the blood test for cortisol, I would ask the doctor to do both the AM and the PM. Oh, that was high as well.
Oh. Yeah, I've had high AM cortisol tests as well, in the blood.
Okay, we should probably wrap it up. I'm gonna. There's one more caller, but was there? You were asking what the dose of vitamin D. I think 5,000 IUs per day is what the Vitamin D Council says, and I think 10,000 is fairly safe. I think if you go measure it, but was
And one more recommendation from me: if cortisol is really high, then you may want to try the progesterone route, because it blocks cortisol at the receptor level, and it also acts on the GABA system. So it's been shown to lower cortisol levels in humans as well. 50 milligrams daily was enough to reduce cortisol by half in humans.
Okay.
All good. Thank you so much for calling, sir.
Cheers. Sorry about it being so long.
No worries at all. Cheers. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, man. Bye.
Okay, so I think somebody called during that call, but they hung up. So we do have some more super chats to read. So we'll read the super chats, maybe take one more call, and then we'll get the hell out of here. So Jason Herrera said, again, for $9.99. Thank you so much, Jason. Ricky, who called in, thank you so much, Ricky. He says, thanks, gentlemen, for $5. Thank you. Nathan H. for $10 says, are there any safe and easy to obtain supplements to reduce the urge for sexual stimulus? I can't read it. It's blocked. Sexual stimulus, and to free up time for productive endeavors for folks addicted to such things?
I think the addiction to sex is, again, just like any addiction, is driven by high stress hormones and or low dopamine. So things that lower cortisol have been shown to reliably cut the vicious cycle of many different types of addictions. I don't know. I haven't seen any studies for sexual stimulation, sexual addiction, but for alcohol, opioid, even for marijuana addiction, if you believe that such exists, usually things like basically pregnenolone and progesterone are pretty reliable at lowering the urge. And some people have found relief from using pro-dopamine chemicals, especially the dopamine agonist called pramipexole. I think is actually used clinically specifically for that. And it's paradoxical because that specific chemical and most dopamine agonists are known to increase sexual function, yet it decreases the addictiveness of it. So in other words, it's even though many people will think that having the urge to always engage in these sexual activities actually means you're over sexualized. In reality, it's under. It's this dopamine hit. It's the increasing dopamine that you're craving because the baseline dopamine is low, and that's what's driving people into that behavior over and over again. So either lowering stress, lowering cortisol, or promoting dopamine, in my opinion, would be helpful.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm waiting for one last call, but it doesn't seem to be arriving. So with that, thank you guys so much. New level of fun doing this with the call-ins. And so again, I can't believe that worked because it didn't work at all when we were testing it out. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, all the people in the chat. 85 people here right now. We sincerely appreciate it. Georgie, your thoughts?
I actually really like the calls. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to do the super chats over calls, because then we can just be taking calls. I thought it's like because it becomes like a third person discussion, right? So it's an interaction that we haven't had before, and I think I suspect the listeners like it even more than just the two of us answering questions.
You broke up a little bit there, but yeah, that was very fun, and again, I'm shocked that it worked. Awesome. So we will be back on the 9th with Emma Sarakis, and we will fix these video issues which you guys have endured this whole time. So thanks for that. And yeah, so any parting words, Georgie?
I think what a great. I apologize for the lighting. And next time I'll make sure I have better internet connection. But actually, my screen also changed size a few times. So I think we do need to work on that. But I promise we'll have it fixed till next time. And the giveaway will continue. If there are any specific products that people would like instead of the 4 that I proposed, please email Dave, contact me or him in any other way, and I'll consider changing them, because I want to give people what they want instead of what I think they want.
Cool. Thank you so much, Georgie. Thank you, everybody here listening right now. Thank you to all the callers. And again, we have an amazing listenership and comment. Oh, and I didn't say this, but like, subscribe, and comment to be entered in the giveaway. And I should have said that earlier. But anyways, thank you guys for everything. You guys are an amazing audience. Have a safe weekend. Thank you to Georgie. Thank you to Steph. And we'll see you guys on the 9th with Mrs. Emma Sarakis. Okay. Take care, guys.
Thank you.